What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're here to talk about some more My Hero Academia. This time we're here to talk about episode 37. I'm on time with this one. I'm home now. I don't have any traveling to do this weekend. So let's talk about this most recent episode, the big episode. That's my whole summary for this episode. Is this episode was about the big fight. Deku and Bakugo up against All Might. There's whole last 3 episodes have been building up to this moment getting its own episode for reasons that they're pretty obvious. It's about the main character. It's about his rival. It's about his mentor. I'm not going to argue with the convention that it deserved its own episode because it's just a trope at this point. But with that said, there is a lot to unpack about this episode. I'm not going to talk and harp on too much of the details of the fight because it's not really worth going into that much detail. Maybe not worth is probably not the right word, but that's a whole separate thing. That's a whole separate analysis video. I just want to talk about the elements of this episode itself that I really liked, not the specific parts of the fight. So let's talk about this. This is in pretty much in order from things that I liked the most to the least this time, instead of just kind of in the order of the episode, because there were a lot of things this episode really did, and it was hard to try and separate some of the things into chronological order because a lot of them were just overarching throughout the episode kind of themes. And I hit my mic, so that might have been really loud there for a second. Anyway, the thing I liked the most about this episode was how the progression of communication, it felt very natural and not very forced, which is a break. A lot of my cases for this are it's going to be a break from the convention. So at the start of the episode, Bakugo is, as expected, completely unwilling to work with Deku or even listen to anything he has to say. And then as the episode progresses and he realizes the situation that they find themselves in, he's working with Deku to communicate a plan and execute it. And like I said, at the same time, he doesn't break drastically out of character for this to be achieved. He's still just as angry and fueled by his ego as he ever is. So that was what I liked most about this episode, is that it was a very organic progression from I hate you, I'm not working with you, to I don't want to do this, but we have to, it's out of necessity. That's an important trait to becoming a hero. Another thing I thought was really great about this episode is that it made inexperience and battle sense really matter. Shonen series in particular tend to have a problem with this, where the fight is always either one of these two outcomes, where the hero needs to win a fight that they have no business winning for their progression, or they need to lose in a really dumb way so it can serve as a source of motivation. In this case, Deku and Kacchan came up with a plan and executed it as best they could. It just still wasn't enough to slow All Might fully, who was superior to them in all facets. Additionally, Bakugo's insistence on self-victory showed not only a stubbornness and inability to adapt, but it hurt the duo's chances of winning significantly. Another thing, the characters didn't bend too far out of expectation or typical behavior for the purposes of storytelling, and fights can tend to have this problem in any form of fiction. In this case, everybody pretty much stayed within themselves. Even slightly out of character actions always tied back into ways that these characters would usually act. For instance, something that I really liked, a moment that I really liked in this episode, was when Deku punched Kacchan. It was a big, dramatic moment. You didn't really 100% expect it, but it wasn't really him acting out of character. He, punched Kacchan, somebody you're supposed to work with. Probably not the greatest idea. It seems strange that he would do something like that, but if you actually think about it and analyze this and put it in context, Deku only punched him because he was mad that Bakugo was backing down on his ideals. It goes back to the point that Deku is a very focused and very pure-hearted person. Despite the fact that Bakugo is an asshole to him 85% of the time, he still wants to see Bakugo be at his best, and he's mad that he's just easily giving up. It ties back into a character trait that's been very existent for a long time. So every time that there's a seemingly out-of-character action, it always ties back into something that the character has had established as a trait. The interaction of All Might and Kacchan I thought was a really underrated moment. I don't think a lot of people will really be talking about this, but I think it's a good moment. This scene serves as a reminder that Deku wasn't the only one with an intense, burning admiration for All Might, and you see this in flashbacks. Bakugo admired him and saw him as a role model as well. All Might's attempts to reassure Kacchan of his immense talent and actually assist him in the fight tie back into his never-ending willingness to help others. All Might's. See, that's another character trait that goes back to what I was saying before. That makes it feel like a genuine teacher-student moment. The animation was again really well done. I don't think it was as good as the last couple of episodes. It was a little bit of a step down. However, I think that was mostly a fact of the environment because the testing range doesn't have a whole lot of depth or detail. as a set to begin with. We've seen this in past episodes. But character movement was really good. Close-ups were fantastic. There were a lot of close-ups in this episode, and it's easy to screw those up because if something looks slightly off, it can make the entire close-up look really bad because there's so little to actually fill the screen with. But I thought that the animation in this episode for characters was stellar, and the effects were great too. It did, like I said, it did lack with environments, which is something that the last episode and the episode before that even excelled with, but I still think that the animation in this episode was really, really good. And then lastly, we'll talk about the light teasing at the end that they did toward the next episode and what is actually to come. So this is the final arc of the season, but setting up for the next couple arcs is actually rather important, and even the ones after that, because while the League of Villains will take up a bulk of the next episode, we'll talk about that later, but it was key to set that up at the end of this episode so that we know going into next week what we can expect in terms of their interaction. They introduced the characters, they set up the scene, but they actually really didn't do anything with the League of Villains. It was like a perfect setup for what they're going to do next episode. So there was one minor thing I didn't like. This isn't even really a big point, but this is just something I did want to talk about, and it doesn't matter because episode titles are whatever. I don't usually refer to them by episode titles anyway. But this episode was titled Katsuki Bakugou Origin. It wasn't really an origin episode, though, in the same way that episode 1 and episode 23 were. It did have a couple of quick flashbacks, which I did enjoy. I thought they provided a lot of context, but they didn't really provide proper backstory. I think that it could have taken its title from a couple of other chapters. Chapter 61 was called The Worst Combo. That would have been a perfect title for this episode. Chapter 65 was called Wall. That would have been a good episode title as well. Like I said, episode titles don't really matter. I usually refer to them by their numbers anyway, but it's still a case of this was kind of a poor episode title choice because now it's creating a prerequisite, and I wasn't the only one who did this in my review. I saw a lot of people, well, I only put my review up yesterday, but I saw a lot of people saying this on the Reddit and other forums as well, which was putting an origin title makes us want to compare it to episode 23, which is probably the best episode of the series up to this point. So it created an it created an unfair advantage, or disadvantage actually, for this episode because we are holding it to a higher standard. That's actually a good transition into what I thought overall about this episode. I still thought that this episode was just about everything it could have been. It certainly wasn't quite what it was hyped up to be by some, but for me, it lived up to all of my expectations. It was dramatic, emotional, and visually stunning, all in the same package. For an episode revolving solely around one fight with almost no outside distraction, there wasn't a whole lot of cutaway. There was a couple little ones here and there, but for the most part, this episode just focused on the fight. It can be hard to hit the nail on the head with a format like that, but in this case, I thought it was stellar, well executed, very good episode. I am going to give it a 9.5. Not quite enough to dethrone episode 23, but it is still on par with episodes 29 and 30, which is the fight against Stain. So what am I looking forward to in the next episode? Well, I was actually thinking as the credits were rolling for this episode before the next episode preview, I was trying to think of if I was going to bring up a big detail about the next episode, this dramatic, important moment that was going to be included, and I was going back and forth on it for a few seconds, and then the next episode preview just came out and spoiled it for you. So next week is going to be the final episode of the arc and the season as well. It will not be a new episode of the series after next week for a few months. This episode is going to be based around a big exchange between Deku and Shigaraki. It's going to focus on a couple of other things. They're going to be obviously talking about the League of Villains quite a bit. They're going to have to set up the new members and the new kind of course of action for the League of Villains. So that's probably going to take up a good 6-7 minutes in next episode just talking about that. They're also going to have to go over the class performances in the final exams, and there's also a sequence where they go shopping, which is how this encounter happens. But the encounter itself is going to be the crux of the episode. That's what I'm looking forward to the most. My main wonder is how much of this interaction they're going to show, because in the manga there's an overlap between this arc and the next arc of a couple chapters, so we'll see how they go about adapting it. But it looks like this is going to be a big finale. They're not going to cliffhang it. There was like a 4% part of me that was worried that they were going to cliffhang it on the encounter itself, that they were going to set it up and then just cut out and we wouldn't get any new episodes for a few months. So I was really concerned about that. That alleviated my fears a little bit in terms of that, but I'm super excited for next week's episode. Even if it is a finale, and there's a lot of reasons to be sad. I've had a lot of fun with the show this year, but it's good that it's set up this way. It's good that it's only 25, 26 episodes a year. They're not getting too ahead of themselves. They'll have time to replenish the story well, and they're not going to ever get to a point where they have to do filler. There has already been a filler episode this season, but given the context of how this season was set up, that filler episode does make a lot more sense in retrospect. It wasn't a filler episode because there was no material. It was a filler episode because they wanted to not have material. They wouldn't want to stretch out anything too far and that's probably not the right word. They didn't want to overextend. They didn't want to take material, stretch it out. They didn't want to take part of next season, put it into this season, because I'm not going to spoil anything, but the next two arcs are probably going to be the bulk of the whole next season, and they are fantastic, at least in the manga. They're my probably two favorite arcs, along with the sports festival in that consideration as well, but it's probably going to be most of next season, and it's going to be really hard to take any of that and just pull it back into this year. So I like the way that they structured this. One more to go, guys, so we'll talk about it next week. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? What did you think? What did you like that I didn't? Something that I said that you didn't like that they did? Let me know your thoughts down below. See you next time for more My Hero Academia.